Okay, we're live. Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On today's show, I have a very special guest. His name is Jimmy Falun Gong, and he operates the Programmed to Chill podcast, and you can find it anywhere quality podcasts are found. He also has a very active Patreon page, and I'll put a link to both his podcast and the Patreon page in the show notes, so you can click through and check those out. I highly recommend that. He does very interesting research, very different than some of the other podcasts out there. But today I came across something on Twitter that he posted that he made available, and it really caught my eye and listened to it with great interest. And it was part of a 7-part series that you can find on Patreon. But the title of that was the 7th in the series of the 7 episodes. Title of that episode is PTK Smoking Gun, MKULTRA Project 39, Human Ecology Fund, Psychosurgery, and Ionia State Prison. But it's based, the 7-part series is FBI versus Programmed to Kill, which is a reference to the great Dave McGowan's book, Programmed to Kill. So I'm delighted to have him on, and he can talk more about his research in the 7-part episode and his other work as well. So Jimmy Falun Gong, welcome to the show. Thanks for agreeing to the interview.
Thank you so much. I'm a huge fan.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate it. So for people who may not have heard your name, I know that you've been podcasting for about a year now with great success. You have a lot of episodes and very interesting material. Can you kind of talk about your background and what led you into putting this kind of research together, and then specifically the FBI versus Programmed to Kill episode series?
Yeah, I mean, my whole life I've always done a lot of research, and I would always go pretty deep on topics, but I didn't necessarily have an avenue to share it with people. So I was on Twitter and I started making these threads that actually ended up getting a lot of traction. And so I thought I could probably do a show. So that's the origin of the show. But I do like to talk about business, crime, parapolitics, and esoterica. Of course, I'm a huge fan, like you said, of Dave McGowan. The name of the show, of course, is in homage to that. So,
right. And so you've kind of done but I think that a lot of your research is pretty unique considering what else is out there. I mean, how do you come across, what are some of those early threads you wrote about, and how do you come across your topics?
yeah, so one in particular was I was looking at, everybody was Epstein pilled, and they had Epstein brain. So we were, I was reading a bunch of different topics. And so I had the idea like, okay, well, I was reading several different books, and Jack Sarfati, I don't know if you've ever heard
Yeah, I
of
know
him.
Jack Sarfati. Yeah. I've actually
Okay.
talked to him. I tried to get him to
Oh,
come on the
really?
show. Yeah.
And he didn't take?
He didn't take it. No.
That's funny.
I'm too small. Maybe I should go back and talk to him. But yeah, I've had an exchange with him. His best friend is that talk show host. I can't remember his name. Okay, it'll come to me. Levin. Levin is his best friend.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So.
Well, I was reading Sarfati's memoir, right? It's pretty out there stuff, but he talks about like receiving this like thing, like this call from the God phone, which was like, I guess supposed to be like a UFO. Long story short, he was selected as like this bright gifted kid, and then Sarfati was put in a like after school program with a pedophile named Walter Breen. Maybe they were doing like testing with Sandia National Laboratories. So like all of a sudden I was like, wait a minute. So like this guy with a kind of similar background to Epstein was on the radar of intelligence as a kid. I wonder if Epstein ever was. I did this whole thread on it. So that was one of the first ones that I got onto, but and there's a lot of ties there. But one of the main things that I like to explore is I read Programmed to Kill, and a lot of my show in general was just like going into Dave McGowan's footnotes and being like, there's no way that's true. And then I go into the footnote and I find not only that Dave McGowan was telling the truth, but that there is even more evidence to support his thesis than I had originally thought. And for people who don't know the thesis of Programmed to Kill, it's basically that serial killers are not what they seem. They are not only deranged lone crazy people who kill people in, to serve certain patterns of madness that they happen to hold. There's this idea, right, that to a certain extent, they might be manufactured, programmed, if you will, right?
Right.
And there's a flip side, and it kind of throws people for a loop because it's almost distracting from that general premise. But the flip side also is that there are like essentially, I hate to use the phrase cult, but like there are cults and organized crime that carry out murders that sometimes serial killings are attributed as, if that makes
Right.
sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you look at Berkowitz, pretty
Mhm.
much clear to me that that was Sons of Sam, not individual. Yeah, but that's just one
Yeah,
example.
exactly. And Lord knows you've done a lot of work along these lines in a number of
Manson
avenues.
too. I mean, they said they
Mhm.
had like I think it was Kiki Fromm said they had 18 kills, but nobody can attribute all of those kills to them. So why is she saying that? That's just one other example. And you talk about
Really?
programming. That's a whole. I mean, Danny Trejo, that actor, just came out within the last month and said that he was hypnotized by Manson. So Manson had the capacity to hypnotize people.
Oh, I couldn't believe that. But I mean,
Yeah.
it's I love Danny Trejo, and like obviously it probably was fine for him, but like it would certainly explain a lot about obviously the Manson family, right?
Right. I mean, there's a lot more in there. I mean, you get into O'Neill's book, and you come across some familiar names about programming, and
Hmm.
that's what your series really talks about: this 7-part FBI program versus a program to kill. Right.
Yeah, exactly. So like speaking generally, like the general thing that I like to do is take a given serial killer and try to go deeper on the story than what's just in Program to Kill, which of course is an amazing text, but you know, because it necessarily covers so many topics, he doesn't necessarily go super deep. So like I've tried to go deeper with like say Richard Ramirez or like Ed Kemper is another one. So like with some of these guys, you know, if you go even more, there's even more details that support the thesis that like something weird was going on beyond just like they're these weird aberrations that just happen in nature, right?
Right. Right.
But the general idea that like the FBI comes up with is that they they like to act like they coined this term serial killing, but sequence killer was the term that they used before that. And there's this weird retconning where they sort of act like they act like they discovered the concept, but like even before that there was like a German term for it. So like there is definitely this idea that there is an ambient level of serial killing probably throughout humanity, but there's a huge uptick, of course, starting in the more or less like the 50s, 60s, 70s, and then it does dip off again, right?
Right. Right.
And
And why? What's the explanation for that? Right. Like, why do they have these just brutal killers during that era, that 20-25 year era? Incredible.
yeah, I mean, and it's funny because other countries often would call serial killers an American phenomenon. And like we all know, like, yeah, there's Jack the Ripper, there's people who kill multiple times in every culture, but like, yeah, there was this huge uptick and then it seems to have fallen off, perhaps in favor of, say, mass shootings or something, right?
Right.
The general premise that Dave McGowan takes, which I happen to agree with, is that the uptick was due to essentially MKUltra and related projects studying and weaponizing it, and then presumably stopping, perhaps, in favor of something else.
Hmm. So all these killings take place during that time of experimentation into behavioral modification, right?
That's right. And the big smoking gun, that's what I called it, was I was reading a completely separate thing. I was reading the book In Search for the Manchurian Candidate by John D. Marks, which of course is a great book and an old book too, right? It came out in like the 70s. And there was just like a one-off line in the book that mentioned that there was a program at the Ionia State Hospital in Michigan where they were studying sexual psychopaths. And I was like, wait. Because I think a lot of your listeners are probably familiar with the popular conception of MKUltra. The popular conception. Yeah, go ahead.
No, you're right. Explain that, please.
Well, the popular conception is that it was CIA dosing people with LSD without them knowing it. Maybe they did some spooky research, giving people electroshock, doing some psychic driving, maybe dosing people who didn't know. Maybe some people got thrown out of some windows. And there's the idea that that was mostly what it was about. Unfortunately, it was much more, right?
Right. Can you talk about what all these sub projects and all these, how vast it was? It was a much bigger project. Right?
Oh yeah. So there were all kinds of different sub projects, and we do know a fair amount of what each sub project was. And there were so many different sub projects, and a lot of them, of course, were not related to LSD at all. So a lot of them were almost like just procuring certain new drugs or this or that, but a lot of them were studying hypnosis. A lot of them were studying Pentecostal movements. Interesting, right?
Mm-hmm.
Looking into different types of trance states. So, like, what's that? Uh, when you're driving and you get sort of hypnotized because you've been staring at the road. I forget the term.
I don't know that one.
Yeah.
There's some weird terms, like there's weird French terms of different states of different. There's many different states between full alertness and sleep.
Exactly. And so the CIA was studying all of these different types, like induced by music, induced by lights, induced by hypnosis and drugs. And it wasn't just a general interest in that. There was specific programs that were looking at sexual psychopaths who were committed in these mental institutions. And the theory, according to the documents that we do have, is that predators, like people like rapists and like pedophiles, essentially have secrets that sort of mirror what spies would have if they were captured and don't want to like talk about what they know. So the hypothesis was that you could sort of work on these guys and see if you could hypnotize them with drugs, see if you can get them to talk about the things that they would otherwise not be, they would be reticent to talk about. And the idea was to study this group of people. But what I found, of course, was that it kept going more and more. So they would take these sexual psychopaths and study them. And then from there, they were trying to do psychosurgery on them. To what end? I don't know. The actual findings of this project, this MKUltra subproject, are classified to this day. But we do know that they were studying these pedophiles and predators. And we do know that some of them were then released to the public. Like the people were released to the public.
Right. Fascinating. Can you explain what psychosurgery is?
Yeah. So psychosurgery, we're talking like lobotomies. I think lobotomies are a specific type of psychosurgery. Psychosurgery would be like an umbrella term that could encompass more things, including, say, putting microchips in people's brains, things of this nature. And so they were doing that to these sexual psychopaths. And in fact, there was this really interesting, like, law case in the 70s going into the 80s where basically this lawyer in Michigan was like, wait a minute, this sounds really bad. Maybe they shouldn't be doing this. And so this lawyer filed a civil suit. And there was this whole interesting case that basically determined that if you were involuntarily committed to a mental institution, you cannot give meaningful consent to be experimented upon, which is like pretty good in my book. That sounds reasonable. The flip side was that a lot of these guys were then released in relation to this whole situation they had. And the smoking gun in particular that I believe that I found, I haven't seen anyone else talking about it, was that Henry Lee Lucas actually passed through Ionia State Hospital at the time they were doing these MKUltra projects.
Wow. And for people who don't know who Henry Lee Lucas, can you talk about him? Because he's something else. And his buddy, what was his buddy's name? Otis Toole. It's Otis. He had a weird name, Ottis Toole.
That's right. Not Otis. Yeah, exactly. No, Henry Lee Lucas is a very curious case because he, as far as anyone knows, we know that he killed like 3 people, including his mother. Like, he was certifiably like pretty nuts. And he might have killed anywhere between, I don't know, 13 to 600 people. And I know that sounds insane because the range is so high. The range is so high because after a certain point, Henry Lee Lucas was taken around by the Texas Rangers, state to state, and he essentially confessed to literally 600 murders. And a lot of people have rightfully speculated that the Texas Rangers and other, police departments were just clearing, unsolved homicides off their books. And, there's a whole mountain of evidence that, like, he couldn't have killed 600 people. There's no surprise there. What's interesting to our story, right, is that Henry Lee Lucas was committed to Ionia State Hospital. And while he was there, he told people, well, after he got out, and other people also testified to this, that he underwent a personality change while he was at Ionia State Hospital.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah. The hypothesis would be that they did something to him. And after he gets out of Ionia, whether or not it's 600, that, is a distraction. But like, he did go on a killing spree. It's not clear to what extent. But he would go on, and then he would be captured, and then he would, be retried for more murders and so forth.
And he was hanging out with Otis Toole. There's videos of those guys hanging out together. And Otis Toole was suspected in horrible crimes, and he was, I don't know what his background was, whether he was in a facility or something, but he was out of his mind too, like really crazy.
Oh yeah, very, very strange.
And Henry Lee Lucas was the only person pardoned by George Bush Jr. out of Texas when I mean, it's just the strangest story.
Right.
Why?
I mean, why?
Right.
I suppose the less damning interpretation would be that he did such a solid with the Texas Rangers confessing to all the murders he didn't do. The much darker implication, maybe we should not state outright.
Right. So he talks about the death hand. He's supposedly in this cult. And,
that's right. So after he was in prison a second time, or rather, captured, he wrote this book where he basically says that he was part of a nationwide satanic cult. Now, I know you've looked at a bunch of different satanic cult angles. What do you make of his claims?
Well, there's not a lot of great evidence, but my understanding is that he crossed over the Texas border to go into northern Mexico. Did you ever hear that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I think and that is definitely Matamoros. But the thing about Matamoros is that the reason Jesus Adolfo Constanza went to northern Mexico in that part is because that's where a bunch of other cults were. So he knew that that's where he wanted to start up a cult. So Henry Lee Lucas's story has like a little bit of truth to it, but whether I can verify that, I don't know. But
yeah, well, it's interesting, right? Because Henry Lee Lucas said that the paramilitary training camp that he was at was in Florida, right, prior to going to Mexico. And of course, we know that there was, in fact, a bunch of paramilitary training camps in Florida.
Right.
So, whether or not he's telling the truth, he's at least saying something that could theoretically be possible prior to the satanic cult angle.
But how would he know all of those elements? Like, how would he? I mean, how could he be lying about that? Is really kind of an important question. Like, he's not a very sophisticated person. He's not.
Yeah,
I think he was like a single only child, and
not much
troubles
schooling.
not much schooling. So, how could he come up with a clever lie like that? Is a real question.
Exactly, and of course, Juarez, Mexico would go on to have a ongoing, like, huge murder problem.
To
well
this
into
day.
exactly.
To this day, yeah. Ciudad Juarez is like a slaughter. I mean, the girl, I did a show on that, and they think the body count is 1,500 to 2,000 women for over the last 20 years.
Astronomical.
It's off the charts. And they think, it's hard for people to believe, but that these killings, and it does happen in these groups. You can see that in the, this is definitely Dave McGowan territory, but you can see it in the Ripper crew. The murders seal the group together. And that's probably what happens in these cults too. Sons of Sam, these other cults that we know of, is that the murders bond the people together. So it's something they do. They may not be in communication with each other, but that's what they think is happening in Ciudad Juarez. The Juarez femicide murders, yeah, terrible stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah, so he's just one example of these other people who've been in or around state hospitals or doctors. Can you talk about Dr. Lund? I mean, he passed away. I came across his name. I know he was a Stanford guy who died. I think he died in 2007, but there's some connection you made between him and the Atlanta child murders, right?
Oh, yeah. So he was a Navy man. He was, let's see here. He testified at the trials of both John Lindley Frazier and Herb Mullen, both. He also testified in the Hollywood Strangler case, for example. He testified at the Patty Hearst trial and the Dan White trial. So you do get the impression at a certain point that he might be kind of like, if you're cynical like me, one of these guys who will specifically like be brought in for high profile cases where maybe the state particularly needs a certain thing to be proven. That's my contention.
Right. A specific outcome, right? He was also People's Temple Jonestown. So you've got, I mean, people have heard of Jonestown as a CIA operation, but they may not know about Patty Hearst's background and Herbert Mullen too. I mean, these guys, it's not believable. I mean, can you talk about Herbert Mullen? Like, was he experimented on, or what's the real story?
It's really interesting because Herb Mullen, okay, it's so Santa Cruz, right? Like at one point they had two serial killers operating more or less at the same time. We're talking Ed Kemper and Herb Mullen. The thing, and like John Lindley Frazier is like not very far. And
no, they're all
the
kind of in the
time.
general vicinity. I just did a show on that. A guy who wrote a book about those three. I'll put that in the show notes too. Wrote a book about those three murders. Yeah, really good. It's very well written because he just used first person accounts and mixed them together and made the narrative. So really fascinating book.
Exactly. And the thing about Mullen is that like it just frankly doesn't make sense because there is sort of this understanding that a lot of your listeners probably know that like serial killers have this particular private compulsion. Often it's linked to like rape and murder. So like Ed Kemper, right? He would stalk attractive women, abduct them, abuse them, etc. Herb Mullen confessed to like a baffling variety of crimes. Like we're talking like a burglary, a home invasion that like killed like a whole family, and then like a sniping and like a stabbing. Like it with serial killers, there's typically like almost like you would say maybe a refinement of a particular obsession. And like Herb Mullen was just like a grab bag of crimes.
Right.
And like the theory that Dave McGowan comes up with is that Herb Mullen probably didn't do most of them, if any at all.
Wow. Oh, I didn't know that. So why does he say that? I'm not aware of that.
Well, just because, like, let me see here. I have my Mullen notes here.
But he was weird, and he in court, he looked like he was hypnotized. I mean, I didn't study the case in great detail, but he looked, Mullen and Frazier were whacked out, man. I don't
Yeah,
know if
they
this is
both
drugs or
were.
what. Yeah.
And the interesting thing is that they went to trial around the same time. They were caught around the same time. And they, I believe, had the same prosecutor, same judge, and a lot of the same experts were brought in for both.
Right. And I think they were held in Redwood City. And I think that Kemper said that Mullen or Frazier was like in the jail cell next to him. He used to tease him. Like
Yeah,
these guys were all around to each other. So strange. And
it's
Lund was at
very bizarre.
Stanford, right? Yeah, Lund was a psychiatrist at Stanford. Sorry.
Yeah. Now, what's interesting with Lund or Lundy, I don't. You're probably right with the
I don't know.
pronunciation, but like he treated Ed, or he was, I should say, he was at a facility that Ed Kemper was at prior to doing his murders, which is remarkable because he never actually mentions the strong possibility that he might have seen him at any point in his testimony, Dr. Lundy's testimony in the Ed Kemper trial. You got to ask yourself, like, did he ever see Ed Kemper? When he was institutionalized as a juvenile? Like, did he
Right.
program him maybe? I don't know.
Right. And where do you remember what institution Kemper was at?
I do. He was at Vacaville.
So the infamous Vacaville, right? So that's
Yeah.
where Hearst met DeFreeze, right?
Hmm.
DeFreeze, to me, you can read that book. It's Revolution's End
Great
by
book.
Brad Schreiber. Yeah, great book. I've interviewed him too, so people can go back and look through that. But
Mm.
something that I was astonished by was that Hearst knew DeFreeze before DeFreeze got out of jail. And that's
Hmm.
a huge kind of Operation Chaos type of an operation. Like all the African American guys didn't trust DeFreeze at all. But
Hmm.
all of these well meaning white liberals, they took to him. So,
Yeah.
yeah, fascinating. Anyway, so Vacaville is a notorious, and I think that Manson went through Vacaville too. Is that right? I don't remember.
Off the top of my head, I wouldn't be surprised, but I'm not certain. I know they were doing psychosurgery at Vacaville.
Oh,
A lot of these same experiments as well.
yeah, and that wasn't uncommon. I mean, Jolyon West had an anti-violence. He proposed to do psychosurgery on violent people, literally
Hmm.
tamper with their brains and make them more docile, like
And
heavy duty stuff. Yeah.
it sort of stands to reason that if they were thinking about possibly doing psychosurgery to make people, you know, less violent, it would also maybe stand to reason that they could do psychosurgery to make people more violent, right?
Yeah.
The research would it's kind of like that bioweapons thing where it's like if you're researching how to stop a plague, you necessarily know how to start a plague, right?
Good point. Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's yeah. I mean, I think they were testing that. This is all happening at the time of like behavior modification, and the CIA hadn't really been caught yet, right? Those all of the you know government oversight stuff didn't happen until the 70s, right?
That's right.
So, and a lot of people don't know how MK Ultra worked. They didn't set up new organizations. They found doctors who were already practicing and supported research through that. That's so that it wasn't like they had to really farm out talent. They just found people who would go along with this program and do all
That
these different experiments, right?
that's right. So we're talking like all over a bunch of different colleges and universities, a bunch of different, mental institutions, prisons, you name it. Like for sure they weren't like inventing a new facility for
Right.
brainwashing. Like they were working with this institution that was already there. And the flip side, of course, too, is that like then the field is incentivized to not ask too many questions and not demonize any one doctor because chances are this other doctor was doing it and that one was too.
Right. And there was a lot. I mean, I think
Hmm.
there's a book, CIA Doctors by Ross, I think,
Great book.
Like you listed, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot that people know and don't know, and supposedly the CIA destroyed all the documents. But if you believe that, I have beachfront property for you in Colorado. I'll sell you. I mean, those files are still there. It's crazy, man. This whole looking into this is really disturbing. And you talk about Richard Ramirez too, and that guy, he might have. I don't know if he was ever in a institution, but definitely he had an uncle who was in Vietnam, right?
That's right. His uncle was a Green Beret.
Right.
And
so like the worst of the worst.
Right. And like for your listeners who might not know, we're talking the Green Berets were involved in the Phoenix, program over there in Vietnam, which was a targeted assassination and abduction program that the CIA ran in conjunction with, the army. And it was aimed at essentially like targeting like the Viet Cong leadership, but it was also much broader and worse than that. They would just, they would also kill people with indiscriminately. And what's really interesting is that Richard Ramirez talked to his uncle, and his uncle would have these photographs of literal war crimes that he committed, just like almost unspeakable things in these photographs. And he would tell him stories. He taught him how to kill, like really just like classic blowback, I guess you could say, right?
Right. No, I think you're right. And like Richard Ramirez learned to love blood and just crazy stuff. Like, I don't know how he got turned, but I'm pretty sure. I think Corso was the biographer or researcher into the Night Stalker murders and said that Richard Ramirez was associated with the satanic, or not the Temple of Satan. What is it? LaVey. He was associated with LaVey in some way. Yeah. I think
Interestingly, Richard Ramirez visited Anton LaVey before starting his, maybe 2 to 3 years of crime before he was caught. And like there are different, interestingly divergent stories about how that meeting went. But I mean, not to say it was more than it was, but like it was either very short or reasonably short. But for sure, like.
And he moved around. Richard Ramirez was one of the difficult reasons why he was not caught, or one of the reasons why he was not caught is he moved from jurisdiction to jurisdiction pretty much. San Francisco, Southern California, right?
Yeah, and his whole MO was to basically do a burglary that would turn into a, essentially an assault or murder on whoever happened to be in the house. So like, it's hard enough to like prevent just a random burglary, but like it's all but impossible when it's like literally just he was being random. Like you can't really stop that.
Right. I mean, yeah. And I think they think that he might have killed more people or done some more stuff. I know that in the documentary that's on Netflix about him, he was raping kids too. He was like
yeah, and that was not well known until fairly recently.
Oh, I didn't know that. I wasn't aware. Maybe that's why I didn't hear about that. Because they didn't include that, you just hear the body count type analysis, but I didn't know that.
Yeah, they recently got DNA evidence showing that he was involved in the rape and murder of like a young girl. And that only was in the past couple of years that came out.
Wow. That's incredible. That's kind of like the East Bay rapist. They just caught him due to DNA. That's amazing. Yeah, this research is really incredible. I mean, and Santa Cruz is totally crazy. They really have everything. They had Robert Anton Wilson. They just have the most crazy kind of stuff down there. Wow. Back at least in the 60s and 70s. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
California was like an experimental zone, and they were experimenting all over the place. Experimenting at, Haight-Ashbury and these state institutions and just all kinds of crazy stuff.
That's right.
Sudanese Liberation Army. I mean, it just goes on and on. Hey, Jimmy, do you have time to take a few questions?
Yeah, let's do it.
I got one from Joker. He says, just curious what your thoughts on sleeper agents and people being radicalized through mass media and how much social engineering has on the populace. Any thoughts on that?
I mean, like, I'm definitely familiar with the idea of sleeper agents, just due to like, media, like the Manchurian Candidate movies and so forth. I have not seen a lot of proof, which is not to say that it doesn't exist. Like, I'm not trying to be a spoil sport here. I've already found a lot more than I ever thought I would getting into this stuff.
Right. They're right. It's like the connections are there, right?
Mm-hmm. I would believe it's theoretically possible. The how widespread it is kind of an open question for me, for sure.
And you got another question from Kindness Cake. She says, Jimmy, do you have an idea of the number of serial killers that have never been caught in the U.S. in the last 40 or so years?
Whew, that's outside of my pay grade. I will say this. I've been researching recently Israel Keys, right? And he was very particularly interesting because he would essentially study serial killers and study how they got caught. And he basically set his whole life up to never be caught. And that consisted of taking fishing trips in one state, but actually going to another, burying like containers full of weapons, and he called them kill kits, years ahead of time. And just like all over the country, he had like at least 5 or 6 that the cops found, like just truly insane stuff. So like there there is probably a certain type of person that just would never get caught. I will say that.
Right. I forgot how he got caught. He got caught because he abducted that woman in Alaska, right? He was on video. Is that the?
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
and the reason why he got caught was because he sort of like the bloodlust caught up to him. So like he kind of got into a thing where he was getting more into adrenaline based crimes. And so like he started breaking his own rules, and that's why he got caught. Not necessarily because if he would have stayed the course, absolutely never would have got caught.
It's incredible. Yeah, he was. I mean, I did an interview about him too. The
Mm-hmm.
woman's title of that book was like the most meticulous serial killer ever. Like really
Yeah.
crazy forethought. Totally wasn't insane. And
Mm-hmm.
then they caught him with like these death's heads. So he had some kind of an occult
Yeah, he
element
was
there, and yeah,
outright Satanist for sure.
yeah, crazy. I'll put all the links to these shows I've done on these subjects in the show notes so people can go back and check those out.
Yeah.
Another Joseph asks if you could ask Jimmy about Adam 22's father being pardoned by Clinton. Just go off my favorite episode he has on hip hop esoterica. Adam 22 seems sus to me.
Oh yeah. I don't know if you know that one too much, William
No,
Ramsey.
I've never even. I don't even know who Adam 22 is.
So I did this episode on the Miami rap scene, and there was a particular rapper named XXX Tentacion
Oh,
who,
I know him. Yeah, he just died, right?
yeah, he was only like 21, so kind of like a Kurt Cobain type of figure. And, you know, essentially, there appears to be like this, I guess you could say, satanic pornographer in Miami who appears to basically groom young rappers. And there seems to be a system where if you go live at his house and maybe, I don't know, dot, 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 but like, so Adam 22 he was in the rap industry. I think he had a podcast and he was involved in a couple ways. But the long and short of it was that he tweeted out a picture of Lil Pump, the rapper, and he said something like, from Bruno's house, that was the pornographer, to SNL, like performing for SNL in just 2 years or something. Kind of like advertising, like, hey, you get into this pipeline, like you're going to have success, which is just like remarkable because it sort of is perhaps an example of something that rappers have alleged before, that there is, maybe a pipeline where if you maybe do some satanic stuff or maybe some gay stuff, you might achieve success that you wouldn't normally otherwise achieve.
I've heard that. I've heard that about Drake. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so, like, this is the closest I've ever seen to a thing you can actually show people to say, yes, that exists.
Wow, that's crazy. I heard Kanye was in some kind of homosexual relationship with an Italian guy who's into the
Really?
occult. Yeah, I got to go back and look into that. I know he has associations with Jodorowsky, which is crazy.
It's so sad too, because like, where did he get in? Institutionalized, but UCLA. Not a institution that had a history of doing MKUltra related stuff.
I mean, didn't West have the neuropsychiatric place there or whatever? I mean,
I think so.
I think one of his offshoots was there too. Like, there's, let's see. We Steals Play-Doh Snakes asks, curious on your thoughts about Casey Dean Coral, Norman Park, and the Delta Project. I don't know what the Delta Project is.
Okay, so the person asking might already know, but there's a great podcast. I think it's like the Candyman and it was something like that.
Yeah, just saw that. Yeah, it's about Coral. Yeah,
Coral and John Wayne Gacy, and it's amazing. The Delta Project, my understanding, and I'm not, off the top of my head, I might get some details wrong, but I think it was a national pedophile network. And I think that it was maybe around Michigan. Curious how, Michigan almost seems like a mini Heart of Darkness in so many of these stories, right?
Right.
But yeah, I mean, in this case of Gacy, Coral, and both of them had ties to like this, purported pedophile network. Yeah, I mean, I would just say, I think that that's real, man. Like, I think that anytime a serial killer gets caught, I think that the feds are brought in to narrow the scope, right? And sort of place most of the blame on just the one guy that happens to be most guilty.
That's what they did with Sandusky, man. I mean, that was Sandusky. Same thing happened with Epstein. Nobody's caught the perps. Who is he serving these 15-year-old kids to? Sandusky was a network. I'm sorry, but and I've heard David Ferry was doing that stuff. Guy associated with the JFK assassination, flying young boys around. I mean, that's the weirdest thing of all is that Ferry had a sexual relationship with Oswald, which isn't true.
That's so crazy. And then it's like Barry Seal. I don't know, maybe
same area. Barry Seal's right there, right after Ferry. Same Louisiana whole stuff. Yeah. I mean, you don't know what Ferry was a very intelligent guy and involved in hypnosis as well. But but you don't know the totality of what he's doing. Drug running, gun running, all that stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
Aubrey asks, any connection overlap between true crime as entertainment genre and PTK objectives?
This is one of my favorite topics to speculate on. I would love to do more in-depth work along these lines because, many people have commented on the idea that like certain true crime podcasts are like very, what's the word? Bordering on unsavory, the way that they cover the topics.
It's like infotainment element.
And like, Lord knows, I'm not trying to like throw rocks in a glass house here. That's obviously what my show often touches on as well. But like, I think that you could make a case that like just the cottage industry, and obviously before it was like true crime TV shows, like there's probably a certain level of natural interest, and then there's a certain level that is maybe beyond that it's being pushed to sort of freak people out in some sort of like, mass trauma type of thing. Because I think if people really study and think about serial killers, they think that they're more common, and then they might be inclined to like vote certain ways. There's some sort of interplay there. So for sure.
Yeah, and at Action Park, I'm pretty sure Israel Keys, the military will not release his file. He's very mysterious. He has a very mysterious background. Not sure, other than the white supremacy connections and stuff like that.
It's weird. He actually kind of reminds me a little bit of like Timothy McVeigh, like in terms of his like background, some of his beliefs. Obviously, they did very different things, but like, yeah, like he was spooked up in some sense for sure.
Yeah, and mom was a cult shopper, like very curious stuff. You don't know what happened when he was young. Joker asked, "What do you think of Young Thug getting RICO charges?"
I just have to say, free Young Thug, obviously.
Yeah.
No, it is interesting. I am looking along the same lines at the very wide prevalence of snitches in the rap scene. My understanding is that maybe everybody is snitching. So like when someone goes down, I really don't think it's always the people that are actually the most guilty. Sometimes it might be for other reasons. There's a lot there. I'll say that.
There's a lot there. The full name of that podcast is The Clown and the Candyman.
Great podcast.
The Gacy story was basically the Franklin scandal. I think there are overlaps if I remember correctly. I'm trying to get through all this stuff. Managers Leor Cohen. Are you familiar with Love, Field, and Love, Patrick's channel, Program to Kill?
Is that on YouTube?
Yes. That's the one where he goes through all the serial killers and stuff. Yeah.
Okay. I've heard people say it's pretty good. I have not looked at it. But I've heard good things.
Yeah, I mean, it's based on McGowan's work. There's a lot of additional stuff, but visual stuff. Let's see. And do you know anything, Conspiracy 1312, anything between the Lisk and the connections to the police and wealthy in that area?
Do you know what Lisk is? I'm not sure I'm familiar.
I don't know. I don't know what that acronym is either. I think it might be something to do with, is that Michigan again? I don't know. Here's another one. Action. Could you ask Jimmy about the connection between Keys and Elohim City? Have you ever come across anything like that?
Because what I obviously like to do is do a literature review. So I'll read several books on Israel Keys. I've only read one so far. So, and the one that I read was like, I won't say which, but like it was a little bit. So, in terms of Elohim City connections, I would not be surprised, but I haven't got there yet. Interesting. I'm seeing some messages. Yeah.
Yeah. The book that I read stated for a fact that Keys hung out with the Keogh brothers, that he was associates with them, and they were kind of infamous white supremacists. Bank robbers. There was a shootout with cops. Really aggressive. Yeah. And there's actually a video of them with the shootout of the cops. I think they both landed in jail. Maybe one got shot and killed. I can't remember. Lisk is the Long Island serial killer. I guess that's
okay. I think I have heard of some of that. I think that mostly what I know is probably just from like, Ed Opperman's show, just so I'm by no means an expert on the Long Island serial killer.
I am not either. Jimmy, we are at about 50 minutes. Is there anything you'd like to add or anything I missed before we wrap this up?
Yeah, I'll just say my show isn't just serial killers. I do like to talk about intelligence agencies, just normal espionage. I do like to talk about finance, industry, some things that sound boring, but then end up not being. So check out my show for sure. I have a bunch of free episodes, anywhere. And then I also have a Patreon where you can get additional content.
S. Yorba's asking, ask Jimmy Dahmer connection with Vice Lords. Have you heard of that?
No, that sounds interesting though.
And then do you know any details about Dahmer and the White House tour? I've heard of that too.
Yeah, no, I've tried to find more details. There's it's probably not anything that this person hasn't heard, but like not only did Dahmer get them into his little class, I think they were in like maybe middle school or high school, but he for some reason was able to get them special passes to like see even more of the White House. So it does sort of like raise some questions as to why or how.
Yeah, very, very strange stuff. Back in Milwaukee, Vice Lord's connection with Homer. I don't know that. Do you know anything about the Finger Lakes? The Finger Lakes in New
No,
York?
that's one that I actually want to get cracking into because like I keep hearing stuff and like it sounds super terrifying. What about
Yeah,
you?
it's back by Cornell. I always think of the Finger Lakes because that's the tattoo that Hunter Biden has on his back. It's so strange.
Mhm.
He has weird tattoos. I don't know what's up. He's like,
Just like Chet
something.
Hanks and his weird tattoos, right?
Yeah, just yeah. Well, it's very true. I mean, it's the elite kids are very different, and
Mhm.
he's certainly different. So I will put links. You can get his podcast where all good podcasts are found, iTunes, Spotify, etc. I will put a link to your Patreon so people
Mhm.
can go and listen to this series. Highly recommended. Again, it's Jimmy Falun Gong, and the podcast is Programmed to Chill. So thanks so much for your time.
Thank you very much for having me.
All right, take care. Stay there. Stay there.